Ever wonder why your team's environment keeps turning into a digital junk drawer no matter what you do? Today, I'm breaking down the real reason sprawl happens and the hidden mechanics Microsoft gave us to fix it for good. If you want a team's workspace that runs cleanly and almost manages itself, stick around because I'll show you exactly which automation pieces you're missing and why your policies aren't enough on their own. The real trigger behind Team's chaos. If it feels like your team's environment multiplies behind your back, you're not just being paranoid. Nearly every org gets caught in the same loop: spaces for every idea, leftover channels from last year's project, and that mysterious marketing to backup team nobody wants to claim. Whether you're logged in as an admin or slogging through daily work as a user, you've probably seen a list of teams so long you're scrolling sideways just to find something you actually need. The rough part isn't just the clutter, it's the way teams crop up for every temporary task, social initiative, or onboarding experiment, and then stick around, zombie style, long after anyone's stopped caring. Now, the first thing most IT folks do when this happens is turn to policies. We've all seen someone try to fix sprawl with a strict cutoff, thinking that naming rules or team limits will keep things under control. But reality doesn't match the theory. Sprawl doesn't listen to policies because those rules don't actually decide when or why a team is made. They only add friction after the fact. As a result, you get this bizarre paradox where everything looks compliant on paper, but real-world usage keeps doubling or tripling with every quarter. Let's walk through what this chaos looks like in practice. Picture a user, could be anyone from HR to sales, typing out a request. Maybe it's an email to IT, a form buried in SharePoint, or even just a chat with, "Hey, I need a project team." Somewhere down the line, either the admin shrugs and spins up another workspace, or worse, the user gets power to hit create themselves. That's all it takes. The new team appears, defaults kick in, and there's no deeper check on whether it's needed, who's in charge, or what happens if the owner bails in 6 months. Basically, your team's list just got longer, and nobody really feels responsible for it. We see the effects of this all the time. One company I worked with had self-service turned on, thinking it would boost collaboration and cut down on ticket volume. It did for about a month. Then staff went wild. Every department started spinning up teams on a whim, from Monday stand-up to March lunch ideas. Within 6 months, their tenants saw teams grow by almost 40%. Here's the kicker. When we scanned the activity, more than half those teams hadn't seen a message, file, or meeting in the last 60 days. Nobody meant to waste space, but that's exactly what happened. All that unused digital real estate piles up quietly, burning storage, causing confusion, and leaving bits of company data in forgotten corners of OneDrive and SharePoint. You can slap even more policies on, but those won't clean up the junk already there. Policies can block you from making Team for or enforce a prefix, but they can't magically fix the real issue. The true source of sprawl is that initial request and the way it gets handled, what triggers a team's birth, and how much oversight wraps around it at that precise second. If people can ask for a team with a two-line email or just click a self-service button, you'll keep getting more teams because the barrier is practically zero. Without a system to slow down the process, require meaningful input, or route requests by some kind of logic, you're basically running an open mic for workspace creation. This is where manual processes backfire. Plenty of admins set up elaborate approval chains or request forms, but the gaps are everywhere. Forms get bypassed, or someone in IT greenlights a team just to clear their to-do list. And once those teams are out there, automation can't easily fix what got built from messy inputs. You can only automate so much when you're dealing with inconsistent naming, no set owner, or project teams mixed in with water cooler chat spaces. If the moment of creation isn't controlled, all the PowerShell scripts in the world won't untangle the clutter you've inherited. What's more, this mess isn't just about aesthetics or a slightly longer all teams list. It's a quiet and expensive problem. Extra teams chew up SharePoint space. Old teams hang on to orphaned files from people who left the company. Nobody tracks the permissions. Over time, you get ghost users, folks with lingering access to files they shouldn't have, admins who don't realize they're still owners of long-dead teams, and a search box that returns a dozen nearly identical workspaces for every real query. The result? Wasted resources, undiscovered compliance issues, and a support queue full of "I can't find my files" tickets. So the real culprit isn't bad policy or even busy admins. It's a weak trigger, the moment when a workspace gets created with little oversight and fewer guardrails. That one action quietly sets a whole sprawl cycle in motion. And as soon as you spot that, you can start to reverse the trend. Because if the answer to chaos is nailing the trigger, what does a smarter creation process actually look like? Building teams right, the automation blueprint. Most folks assume the real pain with teams comes after launch, the endless rounds of tidying up, the late night archiving, or the quiet dread when someone asks, do we really need all these teams? But here's the twist. Nearly all the chaos starts at the very beginning, the second a new workspace gets spun up. If you step back and look at most organizations, the standard process isn't much of a process at all. It goes something like this. Someone emails IT because their department wants to share notes, or maybe they fill out a basic web form with the team name and a few words about the project. Sometimes there's not even that. A quick chat or a Slack-like message, and before you know it, a new workspace appears. Admins shuffle through requests manually, clicking through the team's admin center and trying to set the right options as quickly as possible. In theory, it's manageable. In practice, it's like fighting a rising tide with a mop. Fast forward a few weeks, and even the most diligent admin gets swamped. Requests pile up, each one feels just a little different, so settings get missed. Maybe someone forgets to set an owner or apply the correct privacy level. Somebody else bypasses the form altogether and gets their workspace through a back channel. What you end up with is this wild mix of team names, some with project codes, others with random numbers, inconsistent settings, and eventually tension between security, usability, and speed. The intent is good, make collaboration easy, but the execution means you're left playing catch-up, patching mistakes after they've already spread. What's missing? A single, reliable trigger that always follows the rules without getting tired, skipping steps, or letting things slip through. That's where Microsoft Graph API comes in. For those who haven't poked at it yet, Graph API is the engine room of Microsoft 365 automation. It sits under the hood, handling creation, management, and policy enforcement on teams, if you let it. The difference it makes isn't flashy to the end user, but for admins, it's night and day. Instead of taking every workspace request as its own special snowflake, you can funnel them through an automated process. Graph API lets you define exact templates for different team types, project, department, ad hoc, whatever you need. At the moment of creation, you decide what metadata is required, project number, owner, sensitivity level, and more. No ad-libbing, no incomplete forms. It enforces the right naming convention straight away. No more team marketing, marketing team, marketing to, or worse. Sensitivity labels, often left as an afterthought, also snap into place at birth. HR workspaces get strict permissions automatically, customer project teams follow a different set, and their external sharing settings and guest access lock in by default. Picture this in a real scenario. Someone wants a new workspace for the Acme project. Instead of sending IT an email, they go to a standardized powerapps form, fill out a short but rigid survey. What's the purpose? Who owns it? Is there sensitive data? Once they hit submit, everything else happens behind the scenes. Power Automate picks up the request, runs checks to see if this makes sense, maybe even pings a business manager for sign-off. If everything matches policy, the Power Automate flow talks directly to Graph API, which spins up a team using pre-selected templates. Names, descriptions, classification, and sensitivity labels all apply instantly. Ownership checks get enforced. Welcome posts get scheduled. All the junk work, the back and forth emails, the frantic copying of group settings goes away. What's clever here is how the process stops mistakes before they become a mess. If you automate team creation through Graph API, you leave no gap for skipped owners, broken naming, or oddball privacy settings. Admins no longer have to scramble between different dashboards or remember the 10-step checklist they made last quarter. The whole thing becomes self-governing, at least at birth. Even the friction points for users get lower since requests move faster, everything's explained upfront, and there's none of the classic sorry, wrong form. Try again, confusion. This approach changes the job entirely. Users get what they need, and admins no longer become accidental bottlenecks or gatekeepers. More importantly, governance isn't something you layer on after launch. It's woven in from the first second a team exists. That means your naming policies, security tags, and membership rules are all guaranteed, not mostly right, with a few odd exceptions hiding among 1,000 teams. What you also gain is visibility and auditability. Every team comes with standard metadata. Every owner is tracked, every creation logged. Auditors, and let's be honest, nobody loves a surprise audit, can run a quick report rather than chase down shadow IT. If a team gets spun up for anything sensitive or regulated, you can be sure the right settings were there from day one. The impact: Workspaces are born clean, compliant, and easy to manage, not just swept up after things get messy. Teams no longer pile up in different shapes and colors. You get uniformity without sacrificing productivity. The challenge shifts from fighting sprawl after the fact to making sure the creation pipeline stays tight and the automation keeps up with actual business needs. The next problem then is what happens down the line. When legitimate teams finish their job and stick around anyway, slowly stacking up in the background. Expiration Archival, and the Invisible Janitor. The truth is, every team, even the meticulously created ones, eventually becomes another tile gathering dust in your team's dashboard. At first, it starts with good intentions. That project wraps up. Maybe HR runs a campaign or finance starts a one-off review. The team space gets quieter. Someone checks a file, but nobody posts a message. The active conversations slow from daily banter to monthly check-ins, and eventually total silence. 3 months later, you realize half the channels you see haven't changed since before the last fiscal report. Now, multiply that by however many departments you're tracking, toss in some employee turnover, and it's no surprise owners forget these spaces exist in the first place. Here's where the real headache sets in. Nobody wants to be the one to clean up. If you've ever led a Microsoft 365 cleanup project, you know the drill. You send out reminders, can we all prune the dead teams by Friday? Most people ignore it. A few brave souls start deleting, realize they still need some archived notes, and abandon the cleanup halfway through. Meanwhile, admins are left with a menu full of old workspaces and no obvious way to tell which can safely go and which actually matter. Manual cleanup, if it happens at all, is tedious, uneven, and gets pushed down everyone's list until the next round of Teams Drift arrives. That's where automation should step in and do the work you hate. Power Automate becomes the unsung invisible janitor in this scenario, handling all the boring and important steps that nobody wants to touch. Instead of waiting for human motivation, automated flows can spot teams that have gone stale, kick off a series of reminders to owners, and even take action if requests get ignored. The best part is that it's consistent. Nobody needs to remember what the process is or which spreadsheet to check. Power Automate simply runs on the schedule you define. Let's break down how these flows actually work. You set up policies that flag teams with, say, 90 days of inactivity. Power Automate checks those activity logs, looking at posts, meeting activity, file updates, and compiles a list of low traffic spaces. The owner of each flagged team gets a notification. Hey, looks like your team has been quiet for a while. Do you want to keep it alive, archive it, or let it expire? If the owner responds and says they still need it, great, everything continues as normal. If nobody clicks, the system gives a couple more nudges. Think of it like gently tapping someone on the shoulder in a crowded hall. After a set window, maybe another 30 days, the automation makes a call. It either archives the team or, with another reminder, moves it toward deletion. The kicker is that every action is tracked, so you know exactly what was archived, when, and why. Here's a quick story. I worked with a consulting firm who started running Power Automate against their project spaces. An intense 6 months of client work would wrap, the team would celebrate, and then promptly forget the workspace existed. Within 2 weeks of inactivity, the owner got a gentle reminder. Another 2 nudges followed, spaced out by a month. If the owner ignored all 3 prompts, the team was automatically archived. 6 months after rollout, the list of active teams had dropped by a third, and nobody missed the old ones because the folks who cared had a chance to respond before anything got moved. Of course, automation isn't magic. There's always a risk that if you go too aggressive with these policies, you'll end up archiving a team that was just on a slow month, or you'll delete something with hidden value. That's why smart triggers are crucial. Don't just look at chat frequency, correlate with document edits, meeting invites, or ownership changes. Some teams only become relevant during certain quarters or project cycles, so tying expiration to actual usage patterns keeps you from pulling the plug too early. Power Automate flows can reference adaptive logic. If a workspace suddenly gets activity after months of silence, the timeline resets. And for the high-stakes spaces like compliance or executive boards, you should tag them for manual review or at the very least make their expiration windows longer. One pitfall I've run into is relying purely on the default expiration timer. A few weeks of vacation or a long pre-launch period, and important teams can accidentally drop off the radar. Automated messages don't always land. The recipient's on leave, or maybe ownership changes hands unofficially. To safeguard against this, You want checks for unassigned or orphaned owners and clear audits of who actually receives those notifications. The dynamic expiration criteria mean you're not applying blunt force. You're letting the system adapt to how work really happens. The net effect is powerful. Your team's environment sheds workspaces that genuinely outlive their usefulness, not just everything that's a little quiet. It prevents the digital equivalent of a broom closet full of empty folders and outdated notes, where admins are left guessing what can safely be tossed. Life cycles become automatic, predictable, but flexible enough to respect real-world workflows. That said, once this janitor starts sweeping, how do you make sure it's actually keeping the place clean and not just hiding the mess in a different closet? Closing the loop, reporting, and the self-sustaining system. So you put all this automation in place. Power Automate handles the creation, Graph API applies your policies and does the heavy lifting at birth, and then expiration and archival slink around in the background, quietly sweeping up forgotten spaces. It sounds great on paper. But here's the real problem no one talks about. After all these flows run for a few months, how can you be sure it actually worked? Most admins I know have a moment where they wake up one morning and realize they haven't looked at their Teams dashboard in ages. Things seem quieter, but nobody's really sure if that's because Teams is clean or because everyone just got better at hiding the mess. This is the classic blind spot. You get your automations running and take your hands off the wheel. Meanwhile, nobody's checking if the system is actually doing what you hoped. It's easier than you'd think to slip into complacency here. The mindset is we set up the flows so Teams will run itself now, but automation, as any admin who's seen a failed batch job will tell you, can easily generate a different brand of chaos behind the scenes. What if your flows archive the wrong teams? What if you miss those recurring permissions issues? Without a feedback loop, you're just hoping for the best. That's why reporting isn't a boring afterthought. It's the only way to make sure the magic you set up is actually happening. The admin centers in Microsoft 365 throw out a ton of raw data, but that's not much use if it just sits there. Real insight comes from stitching those numbers together to answer the questions you actually care about. Are teams being created more slowly? Is the overall number going down at all? How many spaces get archived each month and how many get brought back from the brink because someone caught the renewal email? Reporting tools like Power BI or built-in Graph API analytics can finally show you these trends without hours spent in export hell. Let's work through a real scenario. Imagine you've set up a dashboard in Power BI that pulls from Graph API. At the top, you're tracking the rate of new teams creation month by month. Maybe you notice it drops by 20% after rolling out automated approval flows. Over in another chart, you see archival events tracked. How many teams auto-archived last quarter? How many came back because an owner renewed them? And which business units still have growth problems? Add in a column for policy violations, and suddenly you're not left wondering if someone skirted naming conventions or left a team without an owner. The data lays out your blind spots in plain language: high creation rates in sales, lots of archive teams in operations, and a spike in spaces where nobody ever responded to the renewal prompt. But even all that doesn't close the loop unless you're also checking how users react to those nudges and notices. Renewal emails and expiration warnings are only useful if owners see them, understand what's needed, and actually click. A self-sustaining system needs user feedback as its heartbeat. Most platforms let you track notification delivery, but with a little extra work, you can measure click-through rates, time to response, or whether a team's ownership was updated after a warning went out. If you spot a dip, maybe owners don't bother reading your standardized renewal message, it's a sign your reminders need clarity, urgency, or perhaps a new channel altogether. Sometimes a simple Teams card lands better than a generic email. The difference is obvious in the numbers. With this loop in place, admins aren't just guessing if things are running cleanly. Everything gets audit trails. Every exception, every skipped step, those all surface in report logs. Instead of assuming quiet means success, you validate it. And when you do spot persistent issues, you get actionable data to refine your automations. If your archival trigger is too sensitive and owners keep clawing teams back from the abyss, there's your signal to extend the inactivity window. Maybe you realize naming policies hit a wall every time someone from finance requests a team, so you update your approval templates. The point isn't to build automation that never needs touching, it's to build a system that helps you tune itself with every cycle. One of the more surprising things I've seen is how reporting uncovers gaps you wouldn't notice just by scanning Teams lists. For instance, that auto-naming flow you thought was locked down. Maybe Power BI shows a cluster of teams slipping through with names that don't fit your standards. Or you find out through an ownerless teams report that half dozen spaces lost all their admins after some staff turnover. Suddenly, your tidy automations are highlighting problems that legacy manual management always missed. Nothing about this has to be complex. Start simple, review your dashboard once a month, run a quick scan for orphaned teams, and check your auto-archival hit rate. Every iteration makes the process stronger, and knowing where the rough edges still exist gives you a roadmap for what to fix next. Teams doesn't need endless custom scripts, it just needs a feedback cycle that closes the governance gap and keeps evolving with your workflows. So if you're tracking all these moving parts, what happens when you tie every one of these hidden mechanics together in a cycle that actually works? The real impact of Teams lifecycle automation isn't about fancy scripts or chasing another admin badge. It's about keeping your workspace tidy without spending your night in spreadsheets. If you actually want Teams to work for your organization instead of against it, think of your system as a living thing. Triggers start the process, automation enforces it, policies draw boundaries, cleanup runs quietly, and reporting ties it all together. You're not chasing perfection, you're building a cycle where every part feeds into the next. If you map your entire flow, it's not hard to spot which links are still missing or dragging their feet.